Steph, thanks so much for joining us today. I've actually never had the pleasure of speaking with you before, but I've been a fan for a while, so this is pretty cool. And I gotta ask, because the season has, for all sports, for all strength sports, CrossFit, weightlifting, powerlifting, you name it, it's kind of up in the air. Next year's seasons in a lot of these sports are a little bit up in the air. People aren't necessarily sure what they're training for. What are you training for right now, and what does your calendar look like for the remainder of the year?
Well, I think that's the big question on everybody's mind. And thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be chatting with you. If 2020 has taught me anything, it's that planning has to be kind of short term and you have to be flexible. Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge planner as well. That's one of my big things. I love to plan way in advance, and 2020 has beaten that out of me, whether I was willing or not. So training is going well. Quarantine gave me a good opportunity to work on my running, which I really, really, really needed. We're back in the gym now. In Boston, we've opened, and things seem to be going pretty well. Of course, things could change next week, so we'll see. But I'm enjoying it for now. The season, as far as CrossFit goes, it looks like kind of the only thing on the horizon is the CrossFit Games. I didn't qualify this year through the Open, so I won't be going to that. So it looks like I have an extended off season going forward until the next sanctionals come up.
And there's been some talk, and we're recording this, and we don't know for sure, but Dave Castro talked about it on a live stream about potentially changing the CrossFit Open dates back to February, which could impact the rest of qualification season and impact whether or not people who needs to compete at sanctionals to qualify for next year's games. If the Open were to move to February, do you think that you would try and qualify? Would your goal be to try and qualify for the games out of the Open, or do you kind of still have your sights set on the sanctional season for next year?
We talk about this as kind of competitive athletes. The Open is kind of what kicks off our season. So, in the off season up to the next one, I'm always looking at the Open in terms of my preparation. So, because that's just the first element of competition for the year. So I am looking forward to the Open. I think especially this year, it makes sense to have it in February, March, particularly with the games being pushed and everything going on with COVID right now. I know gyms in some places like New York where you aren't even open. So having it potentially in October just seems like, a push. But if I'm able to travel to sanctionals, if they're able to host events, I'll still love to be there. I love to compete in person at those events. So I do think it's nice to qualify out of the Open. It gives you a little bit, obviously more time to prep for the games, but also, it's a great way to start your season. You can use sanctionals as practice and really focus on what you need to get better for the rest of the season.
Now, with this current season, the 2020 season, a lot of some sanctionals did occur. They obviously happened pre-COVID. And in fact, there were a couple sanctionals that seemed to kind of be taking place while COVID was really hitting. And there were questions on, should we cancel the competition? Should we hold them? A lot was up in the air. Did you have, being the great planner you are, did you have events on the calendar that you didn't get to compete in this year?
Yeah. So when shutdown kind of happened globally, I was preparing for Iceland. That was, I think, 2 weeks out from when in Boston when we officially shut down. I was a little bit fortunate this year because a lot of the competitions that I actually wanted to compete at that were high on my list happened early in the season, pre-COVID. So I competed in 3 competitions in something like 4 months. So I actually got a lot of competition in on the early side, which obviously was fortunate because I really like to compete and I didn't miss out on a lot of it because of COVID. But I did have, Iceland was a plan. I was in the middle of, prepping and ramping up for that. And I had planned to go to some through the summer as well. They just hadn't solidified yet. But, everything happened so quickly. And once we were a couple of weeks in, it was evident that almost nothing was going to be able to continue. So that all got placed kind of on next year.
I'm curious about the frequency of competition and the strain that puts on your body and your training as an athlete. Even 5 years ago, the CrossFit Games calendar was a lot more spread out. There was the Open, there was regionals, there was the games. There might be some independent competitions within there. You have your Wadapaloozas, the Granite Games, things like that. But these days, it seems like games athletes have the opportunity to compete a lot more frequently, whether they're trying to qualify for the games specifically or not. What is and you said you're someone who likes to compete a lot, is there a tipping point where your performance starts to be hindered because you're competing too much, because you're ramping up and then recovering from these competitions in quick succession?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And to be honest, I haven't had the opportunity to compete back to back like that before. So I did bite off a little bit more that I could chew in the beginning of the season. So I competed in the end of November at Filthy 150. Then I went to Mayhem in January, and 2 weeks later I was at Strength and Depth. And I actually had a competition, Atlas Games, that was planned for something like a month after Strength and Depth. And I had to pull out of that one because I was just too tired during January competitions to put in any kind of, the needed effort to do really well at that and put on a good show. So there's definitely for me at least, there's definitely a point at which competing was too much. And that was something I learned. I think it's different for every athlete. So some athletes can compete more than others. Others really like, the sparse competition. But that's one of the great things about the sanctional system is that you can choose. So if you don't need as much downtime and you just want to compete as much as you can, then you have the opportunity to do that, versus the person who wants to, compete at one sanctional and really make it count and also do that.
You talk about that 2-week turnaround between those two events. What for you is like a more reasonable turnaround? If you wanted to compete in, 2 events, what is the quickest kind of back-to-back that you think you could reasonably do that and feel like you were operating at, nearly full capacity?
That's an interesting question. Maybe 4 weeks. I don't know for sure. And I think it would depend, you certainly couldn't do one every 4 weeks for, 4 months in a row. Had I come off, I had a decent little break between Filthy 150 and Mayhem. And I think had I had another week or two in between Mayhem and Strength and Depth, then that would have been doable. The 2-week turnaround wasn't quite enough.
Let's talk a little bit about recovery. You're not brand new to the CrossFit space, but at the same time, you are, I think, still someone who I would say from my perspective, and I could be wrong here, is still relatively young in this sport compared to a lot of the other folks in the sport. I hear people use the term, which I kind of hate, but they use it all the time, training age. And they talk about, it doesn't matter how old you are, it matters how much stress you've put on your body. As you progress in the sport, as you spend more time training in the sport, does that impact, or do you find an impact on, how quickly you can recover and the kind of techniques you're using to prioritize your recovery?
Definitely. I think my recovery techniques have evolved with my training. Mm-hmm. There's so many recovery techniques out there, and it really is so individual that you have to figure out what works best for you. And I've definitely done a lot to figure out what I can get, the most bang for my buck kind of thing. It varies though. So I like having a lot of tools in my arsenal so that, at different points of training, when I'm peaking for a competition versus off season, those are different demands on your body. So having a lot of different tools to pull from is really important.
Let's talk a little bit about your just general athletic background, because it's something that I think a lot of our listeners might not know. So when did you kind of get into CrossFit? Because I'm always curious about the timeline it takes to go from finding CrossFit to kind of reaching that elite level. And then what was your athletic background pre-CrossFit?
Sure. So I started CrossFit in 2013. I was a gymnast all of my young life and in through college. So I started competing when I was maybe 5. I was tiny, like that's all I ever wanted to do. So I started competing then. I had an injury along the way. So I took a little bit of my high school years off. And then when I went to college, I decided to do club gymnastics because that was, it was still fun for me. I still wanted to be involved in gymnastics, but my body wasn't ready to take the varsity pounding. And to be honest, my skills weren't up to that competition level. So I did collegiate club gymnastics. And just before my senior year, I was at that crossroads of like, looking ahead to the future, saying like, there's no future in gymnastics for me. I'm going to be too old and it's too hard on my body. So I tried CrossFit. I loved it. And when I graduated, I continued training at the kind of recreational class level until I met my now husband, at a gym in the Middle East. And he convinced me that, it's fun to train a little bit more. You can come to class and that's fun, but he was noticing that I was hanging around for, hours afterwards, just socializing with people just because I wanted to be with my friends. And he said, if you train just a little bit more, you'll actually make use of the time that you're at the gym. And so that's how I started actually training for CrossFit rather than just being a class athlete.
So you're one of those people who kind of hangs out in the back after class, kind of doing like a lengthy cool down, gossiping, yes. Chatting, talking about the workout. That was totally me. Yes. We need a nickname for those people because we see those people. That's at every gym. It's not just at CrossFit gyms. I first saw it at CrossFit gyms because CrossFit has such a social component, and that's where people meet their friends and they want to spend a lot of time there. But it's the same in powerlifting gyms, weightlifting gyms. There are those people who you always wonder, like, are they about to take class? Are they about to train? Or have they just been here for 2 hours since the most recent class? And you like build that friend group around that.
Absolutely. Myself, I fall into the group of like ever stretchers, like just could stretch for hours, just sitting around, not particularly doing anything, but just stretching and enjoying people's company. That was definitely me. And, it was because I was young. I was relatively alone in the Middle East. I didn't really know anyone. I didn't have friends or family. So the gym was my family. And being at the longer I was at the gym, the more people I happened to see. You overlap with classes, and then the next class leaves, and then the next class comes in. So that for me was where I got my sense of community.
Now, when did you move back to the United States along this timeline?
Yeah, early 2019, right in the middle of the last open that fell in February, March.
Okay, so you were still living in the Middle East when you qualified for your first games, correct?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So sorry, you asked about how long it took. So I started in 2013. I guess I started, it took 3 years for me to make my first regionals in 2016. And then I qualified, it took 2 years, 3 years at regionals. In 2018, I qualified for the CrossFit Games.
Is there a breakthrough moment you had in training kind of leading up to that year's regionals where you knew you're like, hey, this is the year I'm qualifying? Or was it more of a gradual process, just steady improvement kind of year to year?
It definitely wasn't all linear upwards. I had a pretty good rookie year at regionals by my standards. And going into 2017, I held myself to kind of high standards. And I think my mindset was wrong. I looked at it in terms of like, oh, well, I need to perform this way. I need to finish in, the top 10 to be successful, rather than really finding the joy in the process. And so I had, a not so good 2017 regionals. And the next time I competed was at Wadapalooza in January. And that also didn't go as well as I wanted it to. So that was kind of my breakthrough mental moment, was realizing like, I wasn't very happy after either of those competitions. And so I was questioning, do I even want to do this anymore? Do I like competing full time? Is this fun for me? And the answer was yes, because I love, I love competing, but I wasn't enjoying my training because I was putting so much pressure on myself, on the outcome. And so the mental turnaround for me was like, okay, I need to just focus on the process and really get back to loving the training. And what drives me to the competition floor really is my training.
Well, Steph, thank you so much for joining us. Where's the best place for people to keep up to date with you, your training, and what's next in your athletic and coaching career?
Absolutely. Well, I try to consolidate everything to my Instagram account, which is Steph Chung 2, the number 2. And, I try to keep everything there and everything relevant. So I have a link tree based in my bio, and that also links to the coaching that I'm doing. We're trying to expand our online coaching a bit now that, some people are stuck at home in COVID restrictions. So we want to just help as many people as we possibly can.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.